Hello! 3 minutes after 10 is the time. A very good morning indeed to you. It's a terribly British condition, isn't it? I don't really understand it. It's almost fashionable to affect mathematical ignorance. I don't know why this is. I mean, maybe it's changed for the younger generations, but for my generation and older, being good at maths was almost looked down on. It was geeky, it was nerdy, it was nowhere near as impressive as being good at English, literature, or, knowing your way around British history, or of course the deeply sanitised version of British history that most of us were taught in our school days. But being good at maths was never cool. It was never cool to be good at maths. Not at my school, not at your school, not, I suspect, at any school. And goodness me, we reap what we sow, don't we? Martin Lewis who, alongside Jamie Oliver at the moment, should really be both running the country, I suspect. But Martin Lewis has always been very strong on the need for fiscal education, financial education, the need for children to be taught from the earliest age about everything from interest rates and mortgages through to pensions and income tax. And he's not wrong, is he? Imagine how much better equipped we would be to deal with the outrageous, the slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. See, I can do that. Slings and arrows of outrageous fortune. To be or not to be, that is the question, whether it is nobler in the mind. But I can't, well, I can. And that's what I'm kind of driving at today. I'm not as dumb as I sometimes think I am. There's a difference there between saying I'm not as dumb as I pretend to be, but I'm not as dumb as I think I am. I do understand most of what is going on, okay? I'm not stupid. I hope you would give me that at least. I'm on Celebrity Mastermind next month. I know what you're thinking. You're neither a celebrity nor a mastermind. But hey-ho, you don't apply for it. You get invited, okay? Which will be a test of my general knowledge, but it won't be a test of my understanding of economic matters or financial matters. In fact, when you watch quiz shows, when you watch University Challenge or Mastermind or, anything like that, even Eggheads, I think my appearance on Eggheads comes up soon. You very rarely get asked maths questions. It's not, and they should be more because they're the ones that have objective answers. I mean, they are categorically calculations a lot of the time, and yet there we are. We don't do it. We don't. What's the word I'm looking for? Celebrate it in the way that perhaps we should. And I wonder whether that is the part of the reason why, at times like this, the stories today are, hand in hand. The UK economy has shrunk by 0.3% unexpectedly. They were expecting, very good, the slings and arrows of outrageous finance. I'm having that. In fact, I wish I hadn't even made it clear I was reading that. I should have just passed it off as my own from the in fact, I will. People aren't really paying attention. You just got me burbling away in the background, so you'll think this is a rife fully formed from my cerebral cortex. I mean, if Shakespeare were writing today, he'd probably be talking about the slings and arrows of outrageous finance. Am I right? Yeah? Slings and arrows of outrageous finance? To die, to sleep, perchance to dream, there's the rub. And I think that might be part of the issue, is that we are a little bit disrespectful almost of mathematical expertise. So the story's running hand in hand today. The economy is shrinking. Unexpectedly, they were expecting it to hold steady. The Bank of England, the governor of the Bank of England said yesterday that the help that they have exerted upon the markets in order to address and alleviate the uncertainty, the jitters, if you like, brought about by Kwasi Kwarteng's mini-budget will end on Friday, whatever happens. He essentially said to the pension funds, the markets, whatever phrase you prefer, you've got to get your house in order by Friday. And consequently, the pound went off a cliff. Steadied a bit now. It's around about 1.1 again, well, $1.01 to the pound. And within hours, whispers emerged from the Bank of England, and this has been reported prominently in the Financial Times, so it's clearly well sourced. Whispers emerged that they might actually have to intervene a little bit further. Okay, this is where we move into the realms of speculation. What I'm trying to convey to you is that this is blooming enormous. This is absolutely huge. This is epic. This is unprecedented. The Economist, which is the most, dusty's not fair, but it's the most authoritative and careful organ, even more so, I would argue, than the Financial Times, although Lionel Barber may disagree with that. The former editor, current editor may disagree. The Economist is august It's august in a way that I think only a periodical can be. A daily newspaper can't be august in the way that The Economist is. It's the difference between having time to contemplate your contributions to public discourse and being on a daily deadline. Do you see what I mean? The Economist is not a daily organ. Therefore, it has more room for contemplation, more room for consideration. Do you know what they said about Liz Truss today? They've described her as having the shelf life of a lettuce. The Prime Minister of the United Kingdom has the shelf life of a lettuce, according to The Economist. And the combination of circumstances is so immense that unless you were actually responsible for inflicting this avalanche of catastrophes on the country, you should by rights be talking about nothing else. Unless you were responsible for selling the country, Brexit, and then letting those liars and xenophobes and racists go unchallenged, letting them carry on to the next victory, whether it was putting Boris Johnson into Downing Street or putting Liz Truss into Downing Street, letting those liars and bigots ride untrammeled and unchallenged over British democracy has led us to precisely this point. So unless you were part of that process, God knows what I'd be talking about now if I had actually sold you Brexit, if I'd encouraged you to vote for it, or I'd told you that Boris Johnson was a good egg or a top bloke, or that Trussonomics would be the answers to our problems. I have absolutely no idea what I'd be talking about now. Probably, I don't know, people gluing themselves to a road in Knightsbridge and the need to have a fancy coronation. The Daily Mail has gone with that this morning. Let's have a bank holiday for the coronation. The country's on fire financially, and the Daily Mail is obsessing about a Saturday in May of 2023. But who can blame them? They sold you all this. They bear responsibility for what is happening. And what is happening is unprecedented. 10 cents, not 1 cent. Crikey, I told you I wasn't. 1.1 is $1.10, not $1.01. Carl says I'm going to start a run on the pound. How long did that stay? I wonder if the markets have moved. I'll tell you what, if you're basing your financial speculations on this radio programme, you're either very, very mad or very, very stupid. So look, it's huge. And yet, what I'm trying to say in my characteristically verbose and roundabout way is that I know that it's huge, but I can't feel how huge it is. I know that it's epic, but I can't quite feel how epic it is. I think that if I was trying to renew my mortgage at the moment and they'd put it up, they told me, sorry, that 1% one you got is that's completely, you're looking at 6.5 now. Then I'd feel it differently. I've spoken to people in that situation, both on and off air, and I feel it for the duration of those conversations. You're looking at your food bill perhaps, and you're thinking, good grief. I seem to be paying a lot more for the same basket full of food than I was, say, a year ago or 6 months ago. But, you know, unless you're actually unable to pay for the basket full of food, you're not feeling it on the ground. And also fluctuations in the pound are going to have effects on imports and exports and costs and production, but they're not necessarily going to hit you around the face that morning, are they, or that afternoon? So I know that it's huge. I know that it's massive. I know when Jacob Rees-Mogg starts drawling inanely about, well, possibly Shell could voluntarily pay tax. I know we've got a problem because people like that, the people that have been propelled into power by ignorance and bigotry, by xenophobia and exceptionalism, people like that seem to know that the game is up. You've got a business secretary suggesting that companies pay tax voluntarily, as he did to Nick Ferrari this morning, then you've got a serious problem in your country. Look, if some idiot in the pub says it, or some secretly funded think tank masquerading, lobby group masquerading as a think tank, or a Rupert Murdoch newspaper prints something nonsensical like that, then you know what's happening. It's propaganda. It's the business as usual. Vested interests buying up media organisations so that they can trumpet the vested interests of people who've bought up media organisations. But when it actually infects a business sector, a Secretary of State for Business, in the middle of a financial crisis, an entirely self-inflicted financial crisis, suggesting that businesses, if they want to, can pay tax voluntarily, is terrifying. The problem is that we are a boiled frog. It should have been terrifying in 2016 to treat somebody like Jacob Rees-Mogg as anything other than the cosplaying Victorian undertaker he so clearly is. Should never have been allowed anywhere near the levers of power. His understanding of issues, just like Liz Truss's, is almost entirely non-existent. It's based, just as his claims to intellectual credibility are based upon a dictionary of quotations, his claim to commercial credibility are based entirely upon a belief that people should be free to pursue profit untrammelled and unchallenged by things like, I don't know, compassion, decency or humanity. If you die in Grenfell Tower, it's because you lack common sense. It's got nothing to do with the fact that costs were being cut on the cladding side of things, reportedly. So how do we get a proper handle? How does an ordinary person get a proper handle on how big this is? 0345 6060973. And here's the thing. There's two ways into the second bit of the first question this morning, which is either this. Is there any way that the game is now not up? I mean, literally nobody is defending them anymore. Even their own cabinet ministers, when they do the rounds, are reduced to claiming that they can't answer questions or that we'll have to wait and see or that that's not my department. I think I heard one of the IEA vampires claiming that it's all the government's fault it's gone so badly. These were the people who essentially wrote the rules. One of them was responding in the affirmative to a claim that they'd taken over Downing Street. It's fallen apart in a month. And if you remove the Queen's funeral from that month, they've done it in the best part of a fortnight. They've blown the whole thing up in the best part of a fortnight. And Liz Truss's premiership or her claim to credibility, her claim to any last vestige of credibility, has the shelf life of a lettuce, according to The Economist newspaper. I mean, it's one of those days. I'm glad it's Tuesday because I sometimes feel a bit wary about being this honest with you on a Friday because I haven't got the mental energy to keep up with a phone-in that doesn't really have much purpose or point. It's just a contemplation, a shared consideration. I think we're at one of those points where things are so bonkers, and I use that word very advisedly. I try not to apply it to people anymore, but I will apply it to circumstances. Things are so absolutely bonkers. Broken is perhaps an even better word. Things are so completely broken that I worry we have it's Wednesday, not Tuesday as well. Is anyone actually fact-checking me today? Things are so completely broken that we don't have much idea of how much trouble, of just how bad this government is. Is that a fair comment? So there are phone lines that come into this studio, and you can get one of them by dialing 0345 6060973. I've just corrected myself. I know it's Wednesday. Stop texting me. Seriously. I have two or three thoughts in my head, as you can tell. One of them is, can you explain what is going on in an even simpler way than I have so far managed to do? But the bigger thoughts, the bigger questions in my head are these. Are things so awful that we don't appreciate just how awful they are? Do you know what I mean? It's like all of those figures of speech over the years where you can you look after the pennies and the pounds will look after themselves. You look at a number and you can conceive of it. It's 50 quid. You've got an idea of that. What's 50 trillion? No idea. What's 50 billion? I haven't got a clue. Do you see what I mean? It's as if we're now immersed in so much trouble financially, not entirely as a consequence of that mini budget. That seems to have accelerated stuff that may have happened anyway, or stuff that would have happened at such a slow pace that we would have been able to handle it. We've got an astonishing collection of circumstances now. And what I find stunning and a little bit frightening, I'm going to be honest with you, because, economies can collapse. Argentina, was it 15 years ago? Nobody there thought it was going to happen. It can happen. And when you look at not just Truss and Kwarteng, but if you look at the people, imagine now, Boris Johnson's cabinet, right? The thinness of the gene pool that cabinet was appointed from. The kind of people that got into Boris Johnson's cabinet, people like Nadine Dorries as Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, And then you look at Liz Truss and think, well, she has actually thinned out that talent pool even more than it was already, because she now demands loyalty to her. So the idea that you've got the thinnest imaginable gruel before you, and you're supposed to find sustenance and nourishment in that, enough to appoint a cabinet, and then Liz Truss comes along and chucks half of it away. And she now has to select her cabinet from, what was it that Joe Lycett said on the the backwash. It's as if all the water has gone and all that's left is flotsam and jetsam. And you end up with Jacob Rees-Mogg on national radio arguing that businesses should be free to make voluntary contributions to the Treasury, because to compel them to do so, to demand that they somehow invest back into a population some of the untold riches that they have extracted from it, would something investment something. The head of Shell calling for a tax, and Jacob Rees-Mogg affecting to understand the issues more deeply than the boss of Shell does. Unbelievable. 19 minutes after 10 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. How big is this problem? And listen, you are absolutely welcome to tell me that it's not a big problem. If you're here to support Kwarteng and Truss, I'm in danger of actually biting your arm off. There's a weird desperation to hear sensible words of encouragement, sensible words of support, but it's coupled with, yes, I'm aware of the time, I shall stop my monologue now. You can tell I've got a lot on my mind. And the reason I've got a lot on my mind is I hate being confused, I hate being scared, and I hate living in a country where the media is so supine and sycophantic that they're going to spend more time talking about a coronation next May than they are about the fact that we're almost certainly going to be in recession by shortly after Christmas. 23 minutes after 10. I came on air at about 4 minutes after 10. I've already personally tanked the pound and rewritten the calendar. Just for the record, the pound currently stands at $1.10, and it is definitely Wednesday. Ben's been in touch to say, I'm reminded of this dialogue from Yes Minister James. Jim Hacker says, fortunately, Bernard, most of our journalists are so incompetent that they have the gravest misgiving in remembering that today is Wednesday. To which Bernard Woolley replies, it's actually Thursday, Minister. Sam's in Enfield. Sam, what's going on?
It is Wednesday, isn't it, James?
No, it's Thursday, Minister. I was reading something from Yes. No, I don't know why I bother, frankly. Honestly. Yeah. Get on with it.
So, James, I think the key word should be confidence.
Yes.
And the market doesn't have any.
Yes.
And the reason the market doesn't have any is because it's like we're all passengers in a car, and we've got the government trying to drive the economy as fast as they can, and they've got their foot banged down on the accelerator. And they've done that through tax cuts and borrowing to fund it, right? And then you've got the Andrew Bailey, who's trying to get hold of the steering wheel, and he's trying to slam the brakes on at the same time, because he's being told you've got to keep inflation at 2%, and that means slamming the brakes on and increasing interest rates. And this car is veering all over the place, right?
What were I understand that up to a point. Yeah. And we listen, I'm not going to overanalyze your analogy, because I use them far too freely myself. Yeah. But what do you think? This is the bit I don't get, and this is where Gordon Brown frightened me a bit, because he has had a proper look at that dreadful book, Britannia Unchained, and says this was actually the plan. And this is a bit lacking from analysis, that Kwarteng and Truss truly intended this to happen. They possibly didn't factor in the Bank of England's attempts to slam on the brake, but the acceleration, with no explanation of where the fuel is coming from, and a fear from the markets that the tank is going to be empty just as they put the pedal to the floor. What do you think they thought was going to happen 2-3 Fridays ago, whenever it was?
I think that they just didn't instill any confidence in the market in their plan to begin with, and they didn't do the groundwork ahead of time. And actually, one of the key things they should probably have done is they should have gone to the Bank of England and said, look, nobody in the G20 has got inflation at 2%.
No, you're not. You're overcomplicating it. What did they think would happen?
I think they thought that everyone would be over the moon, that they were going to get a tax cut. And
but the markets, did they just think the market? But what I saw one guy, I think he was IEA, saying, no, the markets will be fine with it. That's the epic miscalculation.
Yeah, the epic makes. I mean, the markets are always
and the
unhappy.
markets are spooked because he hasn't told us where the money's going to come from for these tax cuts. So the £45 billion as it was that is going to be given back to corporations and punters and high earners originally until they've scaled it back to 43. Yeah. Where will that come from?
Well, the thing that they didn't really account for is the Federal Reserve in the US issued forward guidance to say that they're going to bump up interest rates to 4%, and they're not planning for that interest rate to come down until 2024. And if they get a cough, we get a cold, right?
Yes, of course.
We cannot have our interest rates less than the US, because otherwise no one will lend us the money. They'll lend it to the US instead. And the problem is that they just didn't factor in that people would have their mortgages quadruple in some cases overnight.
This is the bit where you lose me. You're sounding sensible, but I find that level of miscalculation actually incomprehensible.
Well, they're just completely nuts, aren't they?
There's the point. Which takes me back to my lengthy introduction, which essentially could have been summed up with the words, are they as crackers as they seem to be?
So here's the thing that I find very bizarre. I was following the leadership contest, and you had Truss saying what she was going to do, and she's done exactly that.
Yeah, and interviewers letting it go I mean, the hosts of hustings, whatever they're called, letting it go unchallenged, and the crowd all clapping, and Rishi Sunak sitting there a bit like, no, I never thought I'd say this about Rishi Sunak, saying, no, that particular emperor is stark rollick naked. Yeah,
and guess which one was right? Yeah, he was right. And he's got the experience because he's a person from the financial market. And she's got cleverly as foreign secretary, what a poorly named person.
Yeah.
And she's got Kwasi Kwarteng.
This is the flotsam and jetsam, isn't it? The dregs have been propelled
and then the Home Secretary. Right? Is that your 18?
Yes,
really?
That is. And that is the problem. So in that context, that's probably the only room in the country where you could announce that you were going to do this and not be laughed completely out of the building. Except, of course, the various rooms in Tufton Street. Sam, thank you. David's in Holborn. David, what made you pick up the phone?
Well, I'm a black cab driver, so first time caller, long time listener, love your show.
It's taken a while, hasn't it?
Well, I'm nervous. I'm always, us black cab drivers, always earning money. I drive in the city, and I won't name the bank, and I won't name the person.
No, of course.
But I had someone really, really high up in the financial section, and he said the only thing that is keeping us afloat is the reputation of the pound.
Yeah.
Because we've never defaulted. We've never done that. He said, if we'd been any third world country, any South American country, any African country, any Asian country, anyone without the history of 400, 500 years of financial stability to a certain degree, he said they'd have been running the pound. And when he's frightened, we should all be really, really scared. I mean, I'm okay. I've got a small mortgage. I own my cab, but that doesn't make it right for my neighbours who've got 2 kids and a £400,000 mortgage.
No.
I mean, I'm really scared. Because this gentleman in the back, he was painting such a bleak picture, and he said all they've done is they've got 2 years for a general election.
Well, that's what's frightening. I don't like the word scared and frightened on the show. I use them a bit, but I think sometimes...
I do apologise.
No, I don't want you to apologise. I'm just saying sometimes they're the only words that fit, because we can't do this for 2 more years, surely.
Oh, no. He said what they've done, they've gone into the casino and they shoved it all on black. And that's all they've done. Yeah. And they're just hoping it spins black. He said, if it spins black, we might get out of this okay. He said, but he can't see it. And this man has got 40 years of being the top man of a really good a financial institution that regularly makes lots of money.
I don't know the exact odds of a roulette wheel, but even sticking everything on black is close to 50-50, and this is nowhere near.
It's like, you want to be pedantic, it's 17 to 18, but it's 50-50. But
they've stuck it all on red 24 is what they've done, David, I think.
Yeah, you're probably right, yeah, absolutely, yeah. And I think 24 is a black number, but I'm not, that's me being pedantic. But I know exactly what you mean. And he was just saying, and when he said when they actually done his mini budget, the cut, he said we was just sitting in the office looking at each other, aghast. We just think, this is no. And he said there was a few people that made an awful lot of money on it.
Well, I was going to say that over the way there'll be people sitting in an office going, hey! But
absolutely.
But that's the difference between personal interest and national interest. I think your man's right. And I mean, the crumb of comfort we take from that is that there's an outside chance that it might come good. But if it does, I mean, most analysis, it's going to be more through luck than judgment, and it's highly, highly unlikely to do so. And the problem is, everyone's disowning it, except Truss and Kwarteng, who don't seem to understand the forces they've unleashed. Unless, of course, they do understand the forces they've unleashed, which is even more terrifying, I think, than them not. That's an interesting thing. What's more frightening? They do understand what they're doing, and this is all deliberate, or they've no idea what they're doing, and this is all an accident. Oh, my days. I'll leave you to ponder that while Holly Harris brings you the headlines. It's 10:35. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC, where we are contemplating the financial landscape, which is pretty grim. I mean, if you can, I think we're now at the point where if you are being profoundly let down by much of British journalism, most British journalism, because it has been so boiled and biased over the last 6 or 7 years. I mean, it's been boiled and biased for 30 or 40 years, possibly forever. But Brexit's broken everything. And the newspapers, the broadcasters, the columnists, the pundits who sold you Brexit can't admit the scale of its contribution to the unfolding problems, the unfolding catastrophes. It's not the sole cause by any means, but goodness me, it's a massive contributory factor. And then the breaches in normalcy that Brexit brought about propelled first Boris Johnson and then Liz Truss into Downing Street, supremely unqualified people. Johnson on every imaginable ground, Truss most obviously on intellectual grounds. There's a brilliant letter in the Times today calling for some sort of test to be introduced before people are allowed to run for the leadership of major political parties. Well, in this case, the Conservative Party. It's a letter in the Times. So it's the kind of thing I might have said on the radio 10 years ago with my tongue in my cheek. We've got to have some sort of IQ test before you can run for the leadership of the Tory party. But now it's a professor has written to the Times, and the Times have published it because it's such a sensible suggestion. So you have this astonishing, I won't bore you unduly with this because it's a bit self-referential. You have this astonishing tightrope to walk where you're sort of thinking, yeah, all right, so they've got the coronation on the front page of the Daily Mail, or they're still wanging on about environment protesters in the Times. That's a little bit like writing a music review of the band on the Titanic. It's a little bit like being in the dining room at the Titanic, being in the ballroom on the Titanic, just before it hits the iceberg or just after. That I don't know whether or not we can sort of slam the brakes on or avoid it. But the iceberg is in full view, and we're heading towards it at a rate of knots. And half the British media is reviewing the violinist in the string quartet playing in the ballroom. It's incredible, but it's inevitable as well for all the reasons I've been sharing with you or barking at you about for the last 6 years. And well, we're speaking about the media outlets responsible for the corruption of our country in all imaginable ways. I should tell you that the Sun is facing fresh allegations that phone hacking took place. Allegations at the newspaper, including when the chief executive of News UK, Rebecca Brooks, was editor. So how much coverage do you think that's going to get? And why do you think the Daily Mail is facing allegations from a group of people, a group of 6 people that range from Elton John to Dame Doreen Lawrence? I wonder if you're even aware of that. It depends where you go for your news, where you go for your information. So the Daily Mail is facing some, hideous allegations about impropriety and illegality, which they deny, from a group of people including Sir Elton John and Dame Doreen Lawrence, while The Sun is now facing fresh allegations that phone hacking took place at the newspaper, including when the current chief executive, who's already been on trial once, was editor of the Sun newspaper. And that includes people, again, Baroness Doreen Lawrence is doing it, and the actor Hugh Grant is spearheading the claims, a man who has been incredibly courageous in his refusal to kowtow to the mafioso tactics of British newspapers. But every branch of the British media is infected by people who have been or are members of that mafia. Everywhere you go, every radio station, everywhere except the BBC, oddly. And that is why these newspapers dedicate so much time and energy to trying to denigrate and undermine the BBC, culminating this morning in Jacob Rees-Mogg suggesting to an interviewer on BBC Radio 4 that she was somehow being impartial by linking the reaction to Kwasi Kwarteng's mini-budget to Kwasi Kwarteng's mini-budget. I'll say that again, because I don't know whether Jacob Rees-Mogg is intelligent enough to understand how stupid he is, but I know that you are. He tried to accuse a BBC presenter, a particularly brilliant BBC presenter, of somehow breaching impartiality requirements when she linked very cautiously the reaction to Kwasi Kwarteng's mini budget to Kwasi Kwarteng's mini budget. It's a bit like getting punched in the face and then suggesting that your black eye might have something to do with the punch in the face that you received and being told by Jacob Rees-Mogg that you're being biased or that you're breaching impartiality requirements. There is no reason to suspect that the punch I just sustained to my face is responsible for the bruising in the area where the punch landed, and to suggest otherwise, blah, 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 blah. How much longer are people going to put up with this? And how bad do things have to get before you realise that the whole sorry shower of them have had 12 years to get the country onto an even keel, and all they ever do now is argue about whose fault it is that we're circling the plug hole. 10:41 is the time. Sarah is in Sunbury-on-Thames. Sarah, what would you like to say?
Hello. So Kwasi Kwarteng is my local MP.
Bad luck.
And oh yeah, and it's a completely safe seat, so I always feel like my vote doesn't count. But anyway, so just to rehash, I don't want to go too far back, but I have a son who's physically disabled, and he's has a really lovely, happy life, but he relies on medical supplies and medical equipment for tube feeding and things like that. And I went to see Kwasi a few years ago you do remember all the kind of shenanigans about Brexit and were we facing a no-deal Brexit. So I was really scared that, at the time that there would be
about supplies not making their way into the United Kingdom from the European Union, yes.
So he gets specialist food that I think are manufactured in Germany, for example. And I was really anxious, what can I do about this? And Kwasi Kwarteng seemed to keep voting for no deal Brexit. I was looking at his voting record. So, right, he's my constituency MP. He needs to, represent his constituents. So I went to see him at his office, and I thought, how can I bring this home to him and make him understand the implications? So I took some of the medical supplies with me. I took special feed bottles and giving sets and things like that to show him, because I thought they had to bring it home that this has consequences to people's real lives. And he was perfectly polite and everything, but I'm sure he thought I was completely mad because I put these all in, and he just sort of smirked. And I think, so you asked before about what do we think is motivating them, and
does he not understand? He wouldn't derive pleasure from your plight, I don't think. I'm not ready. You may be, but I'm not ready to conclude that yet. He just doesn't understand anything beyond.
I think he just doesn't understand it. And he made some comment like, when the history books are written about this time or something like that. And I thought, I don't care about the history books.
I care about my kids' dinner.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's that thing about being that many steps removed from real people's lives and the consequences for them.
And it's inconceivable to be that far removed. That's the point, isn't it? I know lots and lots of privileged people. I'm sure you do as well. You're probably one of them. Sunbury-on-Thames is a very salubrious part of the South East. I went to public school. I know lots of people that went to Eton. I don't know people like this. I don't know people like Rees-Mogg or Kwarteng who just seem to be almost inhabiting a parallel universe.
Can I say one other thing
yes,
about? So
please.
I tried to take his mini budget in good faith and say, I think there is an argument that, I think there's an argument that if you genuinely grow, well, I don't know, I'm not sure I believe in trickle down, but anyway, there's something about if you get the economy growing, it's good for people.
Yes.
Okay, fine. But then they've done that by they cut the highest rate tax. I emailed him the weekend afterwards to say, if you're really interested in getting people into the labour market and, increasing getting people working and so on, why don't you do something about carers allowance? I'm a carer. Yeah. Carers allowance is about 70 quid a week, and you're not allowed to earn more than 130 quid a week to get carers allowance. And that allowance of what you're allowed to earn before you lose carers allowance completely hasn't been reviewed for years and years and years. So each time the minimum wage goes up, people who want to who have caring responsibilities but also want to work have to reduce their working hours, not to lose.
Yes, I've heard this before, but I've forgotten.
Because it's not a taper.
No, it's a flat rate, isn't it? It's a threshold.
So taking them at face value, I'm like, if you really want to do something about this, why don't you address care allowance? But I couldn't see anything in the announcements, in what was it? It was all about how do we reduce taxes for corporations and give people who are on the highest rate tax more of their, let them keep more of their money. And I don't see the argument about how that injects more money into the economy and drives growth. But genuinely, people who are on carers allowance, who are earning 130 quid a week, if they're allowed to work for more hours and earn more, it gets more people in the labour market working more hours. They've got more money to spend, and frankly, that money will be spent because we're all struggling with rising energy costs as well. But I've not had a reply. I'm sure he's very busy.
I'm sure he's very busy as well. This is the detachment point, isn't it? This is the idea that it's not logic or even insight. It's barely even an ideology to believe that by ensuring the rich can get richer, regardless of where the money comes from, it will somehow enhance the financial health of everybody in an economy. Instead of thinking the people most likely to spend money should be the people you prioritise when it comes to increasing the amount of money they have to spend. I mean, it's simplistic, but my goodness me, it's closer to ideological or logical than anything that seems to come out of the mouths of Kwarteng or Truss. I don't want to add to your burdens, but I do want to confirm your concerns. I don't know if you've seen this story yet. Pete Foster has it in the FT overnight, but 3 major UK safety and competition regulators are struggling to adapt to expanded roles after Brexit, leaving businesses and consumers facing increased safety risks and higher costs. And this comes from a select committee, and one of those 3 regulators is the Health and Safety Executive, which will be looking at, and they're worried that the ingress of goods into this country is going to be impeded by the failure of the government to put a proper regulatory environment in place. So that might affect some of the stuff that you're already worried about.
And can I make one more point? I know
quickly, Sarah, because we're never late for breaks on this programme.
The NHS, lots of people who are not working at the moment because they've got long COVID and other illnesses, or they're waiting for appointments. Yeah. Let's fund the NHS because we've seen a deterioration. My son's 8. We've seen how much worse things have got for people working in the NHS in the 8 years since we've been, very heavy users of the service, which we're very grateful for. But, actually, fund the NHS, get those points, and then you will help people. It's not, I don't know. But I think I heard Jamie Oliver yesterday said, I'm not sure they care enough.
He was on form yesterday. I had to text him later. I had to text him later to complain about the fact that I'd heard him on every radio programme except mine. He was suitably apologetic, Sarah. But he was, and he just said, I don't think they care. I don't think they're capable of the kindness required. That was in the context of free school meals for hungry children. Free school meals for hungry children. I'll just leave you with that thought, actually. 10:51 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Where do you want to go? There are other stories around today, but I have a very strong sense that we should not be talking about anything else. And I struggle a bit with that sense when I don't see all of the media screaming from the same rooftops. But of course, as I keep reminding you, and as I am going to have to keep reminding you probably forever, most of the media in this country gift-wrapped and sealed with a kiss precisely the problems and the catastrophes that the country is now facing. They told, remember sunlit uplands, remember more money for the NHS, remember less red tape, that story that I just shared with Sarah about UK regulators struggling to adapt to expanded roles after Brexit. This is where it goes like a kind of Kafka story. There is loads more red tape as a direct consequence of Brexit. Loads more. So here are 3. You decide for yourself how important these 3 organisations are. The Competition and Markets Authority, the Food Standards Agency, and the Health and Safety Executive. Right? It's the Public Accounts Committee warning that the government's poor preparation and planning have combined with international political realities to expose UK consumers and businesses to greater risks and costs. There's nothing more important than that in the context of public accounts or in the context of British business. And the reason why, and I don't know whether the Public Accounts Committee can go into it like this, but I can. The reason why the government has not prepared or planned for these problems is that the government is still in denial. Along with 52% of the British media, 80% of the British media, they're still denying that these problems exist. Liz Truss stands up in public and talks about cutting red tape, and nobody says, but we are massively increasing the amount of red tape. We've become a third country with our biggest trading partner, and that means we need loads more regulation in order simply to carry on doing what we were doing before with no friction at all. I don't talk about it every day because I'd bore you blue. But my God, it's insane what's happening in this country, just in little areas like this. And you speak to a mum like Sarah, worried about medical supplies coming in to the country for her little boy. And the health and safety executive is warning that civil service budget cuts, which Rees-Mogg is dancing around the room boasting about, are also likely to impede their ability to adapt to a post-Brexit regulatory environment. So they are denying that problems exist. Therefore, they are failing to prepare a regulatory framework that can deal with these problems or even simply process these problems. No one's pretending that things are ever going to be as frictionless or as smooth as they were before. They're denying the problems exist, failing to prepare a system that can process the problems, and then promising to reduce the number of people charged with providing the system that they're failing to prepare to process the problems that they have simultaneously created and denied. Come on, it's like a Russian doll of idiocy. Every time you open another one, there's another one inside. These are the people in charge of everything from the staffing of abattoirs to the licensing of medicines or the surveillance of disease threats from overseas. They need more people. And Rees-Mogg is dancing around the room promising to reduce the number of civil servants. They need help fixing problems that this government created and denies. Oh, man. But yeah, if I'd flogged you this, I'd probably be talking about coronations and environmental protesters. Almost certainly. Except I wouldn't, because I'm too honest. I'll be self-flagellating myself on the radio, apologising to you every single day for ever treating someone like Nadine Dorries or Jacob Rees-Mogg or David Davis or Andrew Bridgen or Andrea Leadsom like valid contributors to public discourse, for pretending that somebody like Digby Pudding Jones had the first idea what he was talking about when he flogged this absolute nightmare to an utterly undeserving country. I'd probably spend the rest of my life in a form of Opus Dei, wearing a hair shirt live on the radio, saying sorry every day. 10:55 is the time. Is the game up? I mean, it has to be, doesn't it? We've got PMQs coming up at 12. That'll be fun. Theo will join us at 11:45 for a as yet untitled and possibly soon to be regular feature in which we'll go through the political stories of the day. We're running with Theo. What is it? We're going at the moment with Political Theory. Political Theory as the title for the possibly soon to be regular feature on the programme, in which Theo Usherwood and I will go through the political stories of the day. Quite pleased with that Russian doll of idiocy. I see a few of you have picked up on that as well. It is, though. Every time you open one door, there's another one inside going, I'm stupid too. But if they do it in a posh accent, they'll get away with it. I should shut up, really, and take some more calls. Alan's in Tenby. Alan, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello, Alan.
It's to touch on something you mentioned in your introduction earlier, really. I asked myself, how did we get to this situation where the markets crash and so forth? How could we not see it? And I think it's because, in the final analysis, the last two governments, the cabinets have been there not on merit, but on the particular affection or the loyalty they showed to their leader. Yes. So Truss has surrounded herself with people. She was limited because she could only pick people in her cabinet who supported her, which was the minority of Tory MPs. And there are very talented MPs outside of that now because they wanted Sunak. Boris was exactly the same. He surrounded his cabinet, or he made his cabinet based purely on those who supported him in Brexit. So you ended up with people like Priti Patel, no intellectual ability at all. So there's no critical friends in your cabinet. There's no critical friends in your
inner circle. Phrase. I usually call it the Wazzock alarm, actually. But your critical friend sounds a lot more intellectual, doesn't it? The critical friend who'll say to you, come on, mate.
That's right. You need your mate sitting alongside you. They must be on board in terms of your broad objectives, but they should be objectively critical in the specific measures you intend taking in order to get you to that long-term objective. And that's a sign of strength when you can take criticism from those close to you. Yeah. But it's a sign of weakness, great weakness, when you surround yourself with people who will just agree with you. And you become more and more isolated because the only voices you hear are those of support.
Well, it's worse than that. You will cut off at the knees anybody who dissents. And Johnson did that in such a violent fashion when he actually threw people out of the party. When I always think of Philip Hammond at this point, to go from Chancellor to deselection in the blink of an eye is almost it's the distillation of what you describe, Alan. And it's quite fascistic or totalitarian in essence, because it is essentially outlawing dissent.
Well, he sidelined what I would call a moderate, sensible Tories, the centre ground, the Dominic Reeves. Yeah. He didn't want to hear those voices because they spoke so much sense.
Well, they knew what was going to happen
see both sides.
With Brexit, and they even if they had accepted the result of the referendum, they knew that some serious work was going to have to be done to address the problems it would create, when acknowledging or even admitting the existence of problems was a capital offence. And to a degree it still is, although it's much harder to sustain the idea that there won't be any problems.
I think Truss learned the lesson from that.
Yeah, I did
and,
too.
And Kwasi Kwarteng learned it, because what they do then, they don't want to hear that opinion in the first place. I mean, Kwasi Kwarteng sacked the Chief Secretary to the Treasury immediately.
And tried to hire someone from the Ministry. Tried to hire someone from the Ministry of Justice, and you turned on that now, and they've had to go for an established Treasury expert to replace the fellow they got rid of.
But they got rid of someone who had years of experience, a highly qualified economist,
Tom Scholar,
who would have heard this and thrown it back.
Yeah.
And it was said to me recently that, Kwasi Kwarteng, he is an economist. He's got a PhD from Cambridge in economics. No, he hasn't, actually. I looked into that very carefully.
Yes.
And he doesn't have economic sort of credentials in that sense at all. He's a classicist, and he studied classics and ancient history for his first degree. And he's got a PhD in economic history.
Yes.
Specifically, he wrote a dissertation on coinage in Britain between 1695 and 1697. Now that
I didn't know the last bit. Are you sure about that?
Yeah,
good
absolutely.
Lord.
Look it up.
I will.
So it's the history of economics. That's the award, the PhD from Cambridge. But that was the actual dissertation title. Okay, the thinking behind the
coinage of 1695 to 1697.
1695. Yeah,
well, maybe we're the dummies here. Maybe that's a really important insight into the workings of modern economies, Alan.
Well, yeah, before any stock markets had even been created.
Details.
So he ran with a theory. Yeah. I can almost imagine him on day one outlining the theory to the Chief Secretary. And the Chief Secretary, almost like an old sketch from Yes Minister from years past, immediately comes back and says, well, yes, I understand that, Secretary, but bear in mind A, B, C, D, and E. Let's shift him on. Get rid of him straight away. I want someone to agree with this. I want someone to agree with my blind ideology. And that's we're in this
what
situation
would happen
today.
I'm late for the news. Oh, rats. I'll ask this afterwards, and you won't be here to answer it, but thank you for your contribution, Alan. You got me chomping at the bit to explore further. It's 1 minute after 11 though, so it's 5 minutes after 11, and I do feel that it would be remiss of us to look away from what is happening, which has changed again while we've been on air, as you would have heard in the bulletins. Yesterday, the Governor of the Bank of England, and expect him to come in for a right old kicking from the Tufton Street lot and all the sort of brain dead forelock tuggers. He'll be coming in for a bit of a kicking imminently, and the announcement yesterday that they will definitely cease this kind of form of quantitative easing or its support of the bond market on Friday. Andrew Bailey told pension funds, you've got 3 days left now and you've got to sort it out. And then overnight, the Financial Times suggested that the bank may continue to buy bonds post-Friday. And then this morning, the bank has confirmed that they will not be continuing to buy bonds post-Friday. So there's something going on there. I know not what. But I do know this, that the point that Michael was just making a moment ago about yes men, or about, you see these phrases that I come up with and you think I'm the one that's got the problem, and then a few months pass or a couple of years pass and you think, flipping heck, that's what he was talking about. So the forelock tuggers and cap doffers in cabinet are a large part of the problem that the country is currently facing. Apart from sycophancy, what qualifications did you need to get into Boris Johnson's cabinet? Apart from blind loyalty, apart from sycophantic stupidity, what qualifications did you need to become Home Secretary or Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport or Foreign Secretary? What qualifications did you need? Yeah, exactly. And in Liz Truss's cabinet, you've got to be even more sycophantic than you had to be to get into Boris Johnson's cabinet. And the sycophancy is often dishonest. Liz Truss was obviously sitting on her hands and biting her tongue all the time when she was in Boris Johnson's cabinet because she so clearly disagrees with pretty much everything he ever said. Even though, of course, her current mandate rests entirely upon an election victory that Boris Johnson secured. Here's that letter from the Times. I'll just read you the last paragraph. Professor Ian Kunkler at Edinburgh has written, "One can only conclude that the Conservative Party needs to formalise the skill set required for candidates for its leadership and more rigorously assess whether the thresholds of competence are met." I would have said to you a few years ago they need IQ tests. Probably would have said it actually when Jeremy Corbyn was leading the Labour Party. I'd have said to you, we've got to have IQ tests before people can actually get these jobs. We've got to stop putting half-wits in positions of potential power in his case, actual power in Liz Truss's case. But I would have been half joking. And I certainly wouldn't have expected my letter to be published in the Times. But so speedily has Liz Truss dismantled any claim to credibility that you now have esteemed academics writing to the Times about the need for tests, essentially IQ tests or aptitude tests, thresholds of competence tests, before people are even allowed to run for office. And this is Farage'ification. This is what happens when plausible people who are spitting bile and talking twaddle are invited onto Question Time more often than David Dimbleby managed to get on it, when they're given radio shows and television shows despite the fact that they speak undiluted twaddle in a very plausible and persuasive fashion. That's what happens. So where the media leads, politics follows. Do you think that Liz Truss could have been Prime Minister if we hadn't created a country in which people like Digby Pudding-Jones and Nigel Farage were treated like intelligent contributors to public discourse? Of course we couldn't. Of course we couldn't. And part of the process of creating a country in which people like Nigel Farage and Digby Pudding-Jones are treated like intelligent contributors to public discourse is loading the British media with secretly funded spokespeople from lobby groups masquerading as think tanks who won't even tell you who pays their wages. Imagine looking at the British media and thinking, do you know what? I don't think it's doing enough to forward the interests of non-dom billionaires. I think we really need to get some think tanks set up, or we'll call them think tanks, to really and we'll fund them as well, but we won't tell anyone we're funding them, because I'm looking at the British media landscape and I'm thinking, whoa, it's nowhere near right-wing enough. It's nowhere near the level of support for plutocrat non-dom billionaires that we want to see. It's absolutely incredible. And then we look at what's happening today. We've got declining growth. And we've got a pound that's bouncing all over the place. It might as well be on a space hopper at the moment, the pound. Its volatility being the absence, being the opposite of stability, and a change even while we've been on air in what is expected to happen in the next few days. So, listen, I'm still open to calls on the detail of the financial situation, but I think we've covered it fairly comprehensively. I'm interested now in what happens next. I can't, and I was thinking about this when the last caller was talking about being surrounded by yes men. I don't get calls anymore from people who want to defend any of it. I know they're out there, but once actually immigration is removed from these conversations, most of these clowns have got absolutely nothing left. You can't really blame immigration for the fall in the pound, can you? You can't really blame immigration for the markets being spooked. You can't really blame immigration for market volatility or interest rates going up. And if you can't blame immigration for it, then most of the people that have sort of propelled British politics over the last 10 years have got absolutely nothing left to say. And that holds true for people both in politics and in the pub. But I don't know if anyone defends it. I don't even see the texts or the emails anymore. You get personal abuse, and we have Idiot's Corner, obviously, but actual, genuine, if you like, good faith attempts to defend what's going on don't seem to exist anymore. I don't know if other people get them. To actually say, no, how dare you, Liz Truss is brilliant. I mean, how many people voted for her? 60,000 people, was it, or something? Where are they? You shouldn't really be able to do that. You shouldn't really be able to put Liz Truss into Downing Street and then just wash your hands of the whole thing and waltz away with your anonymity secure. Where are these people? I don't understand how it can actually be permitted for somebody to use a mandate won by someone whose policies she's trashing and abandoning, even if he was a complete catastrophe and clown car himself. I don't understand how it can go unchallenged and unremarked. And that's what I mean by what happens next. So there are things happening here that I have never seen before. There are things happening in the United Kingdom that I've never seen before. It is as if an oil tanker is turning around, and it's not going to happen quickly. I'm pretty confident you can't turn an oil tanker around quickly. It is as if the realization of what people like me have been screaming about for a few years now has reached a crystallization, a distillation, if you like, a concentration in the case of Truss and Kwarteng. That means even people who think that I took leave of my senses in 2016 are now having to go, oh yeah, do you know what, that Tufton Street business probably is. And actually the failure of the media to actually react, yeah, that probably, and actually the markets and the rest of the world are looking at us and responding in a way that bears no resemblance whatsoever to the way in which we've been told things are being done and we've been told things are being run. The Daily Mail had a front page, finally, a true Conservative budget. When was that, 3 weeks ago? Finally, a true Conservative budget. They don't understand anything either. They're all high on their own supply. And that supply, as I've mentioned to you, when you remove immigration from the mix, they've got nothing left, these people. They pretend to be cross about environmental protesters or universities teaching more history than they used. They're not really cross about that. They might feel threatened and frightened by it, but it's not a visceral hatred like they feel for refugees or foreigners. You remove the refugees and the foreigners from the landscape of British political discourse, and the people who've been in the steering seat, the people who've been in the driving seat for the last 6 years have got absolutely nothing to say. It's a part of the reason why everything's falling apart. But the speed with which it's falling apart is quicker than the response of the people responsible for it, whether they're politicians, because the Conservative Party isn't making the noises it should be making when you've got a sort of kamikaze pilot in the front of the bus, and the media doesn't know what to do. They've been so long tugging their forelocks and doffing their caps at whoever was anointed by the Tory faithful. They've got no idea how to respond to the fact that you've got a complete wazzock, two complete wazzocks, surrounded by sycophants and idiots, in charge of the entire country. And that's why the markets are spooked, because they heard that mini budget and they sort of went, whoa, get out. These people haven't got the first idea what they're doing. And they're right. But it's almost patriotically difficult to admit that, because we live here and we love living here and we love our country. And to see the people in charge embark upon such a boneheaded, evil path is hard to fully appreciate, because you don't want to believe it. You want to believe it can't be that bad. Oh, it can't be. They're all the same. But they're not. These two are uniquely awful. Uniquely awful. And to say that in a country where Boris Johnson has been Prime Minister and Nadine Dorries has been a Secretary of State within the last few months, to talk of Truss and Kwarteng as being uniquely awful should give everyone the shivers. Absolutely everyone. I'm going to ask you what you think is going to happen next. You don't need any qualifications to answer this question. All that I ask is a modicum of consideration and contemplation. Just take a couple of minutes to think it through before you ring in. It could be a comforting contribution. It could be a terrifying one. It could be somewhere in between. What is going to happen next? And you can come at it from either the political, the fiscal, or the economic, the social or the personal, or possibly even the professional. What is going to happen next? We are in uncharted waters. The people we normally rely upon to tell us how uncharted the waters are can't do so, because they were part of the process of putting us into these waters. The BBC is doing its best. Its live blog is its lead story on its website. I don't know what sort of numbers it gets, but the Daily Mail is leading on a demand for a bank holiday when the King gets crowned in May of 2023. So what do you think is going to happen next? And I've done this a few times recently with a degree of success. I would really like to talk to Conservative members in the first instance and Conservative voters in the second. And the more dyed-in-the-wool you are as a Conservative voter, the more interesting your contribution becomes. You may not recognise my analysis. You may dispute it. You may dismiss it. You may reject it. I don't currently see how you can, but it doesn't affect your qualifications to answer this question. What is going to happen next? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. None of us know. Nobody knows. We've all got perhaps some thoughts and theories. Nobody knows what is going to happen next. And those are the moments in which I will ask the question. I don't ask it very often, but I'm asking it now. What's going, not what, and again, I qualify it, not what do you want to happen next? All right? That's a different one. Might be hard to separate the two. But what do you think, drawing on your knowledge, your understanding, your instincts, what do you think is going to happen next? Apart from this. 21 minutes after 11. What do you think is going to happen next? I'm not excluding anyone from the conversation, but people who voted, Conservative members who voted for Rishi Sunak might be the most interesting contributors. I don't know. I'm just thinking out loud. Well, there's no surprise there. It's what I do all day, every day. I like this from Chris in Brighton. My wife has just informed me that she changed course at university from economics to economic history because it was much easier and she was basically lazy. There's a reference to the contributor earlier telling us that Kwarteng's PhD is actually in economic history, something to do with 17th century coinage. So the idea that he has some sort of economic... I don't think you need an economic background necessarily to be Chancellor of the Exchequer. Most of them haven't had one, but that did make me laugh. Jules is in Box Hill. Jules, what's going to happen next?
Hi, James.
Hello, Jules.
Hello, first-time caller. Very nervous, but anyway.
It's only me.
My thoughts really are that there is going to be some other kind of coup within the Tory party and that they're going to try and get her out. Anything rather than call a general election, because I think at the moment they know that would be a no-brainer. But I think, they might want to try and come in with someone like Michael Gove or someone a bit more stable. I know, horrible idea, but,
I think he might have knifed too many people, Gove. I don't know that he has a... I don't think he has a power base. I don't know who the... I suppose he might be a continuity candidate. I don't know if you were ambitious, you probably wouldn't want to take over. I think they must be close. Absolute, act of gods excluded. They must be close to accepting that the gig is up for the next election. They must be close to that. And therefore, would you want to lead the party to a big defeat?
Well, my feeling is that I don't think that they have any care about that sort of thing anymore. They're only concerned about their own careers, and even if it's only going to last for a few weeks or months.
If I'm still Prime Minister, it's still on my CV, even if I was only Prime Minister for 10 minutes. I don't know who the candidate would be, and that would involve... the problem here is that the miracle of Boris Johnson's defenestration was the fact that it took the four-lock tuggers and the sycophants to do it. It might have started on the backbenches, but until his own cabinet... After he got through a vote of no confidence, but it took his own cabinet to start submitting publicly letters of no confidence. That could happen to Truss.
Yes,
that's the way it would happen, isn't it? I think.
And I think just from what I've read, and it's purely like Open Britain and that sort of thing, that there are talks about that sort of thing going on in the tea rooms in the House of Commons or whatever.
To be fair, I think there always are, but this time they'll be a little bit more febrile and a lot louder. So that idea, that's how it would work. Someone would break cover. It was Javid and was it Javid and Sunak who did it last time? It was, wasn't it? Didn't they go first? And they went in tandem, Health and Chancellor. So you'd get something like... possibly, I don't know, Badenoch and Braverman or I can't even remember who's in the cabinet. It's such an appalling selection. Cleverly.
Yeah, misnomer. Yeah.
And Zahawi. They'd be the ones. And then you'd see whether or not people followed.
Yeah. But I think people will. They can't sustain this. It's awful.
No, I think you must be right, he says, but then again, I've been thinking, surely people can see what I can see for the best part of, 4-6 years now, and still not everybody can. Mel Stride, who's been very significant in this, I think he chairs the Treasury Select we need ideas to help with this mess because it's breaking the triple lock and raising the pension age. They were his ideas, apparently. But I'm looking for more sort of existential suggestions of what's going to happen next, as in to the government, to the Prime Minister, to the pair of wazzocks surrounded by idiots and sycophants. Chris is in Sevenoaks. Chris, what do you reckon?
Well, James, the reason I was inspired to call in, thank you for inviting Conservative members to call in.
Always welcome. Always welcome, Chris.
Views. Thank you. I'm a regular listener because I like to take in a broad church of views. So I enjoy your show and listen to it for years.
Good.
And you make a lot of very strong points, even if I don't agree with all of them. But you asked the question, what is going to happen next? And to answer that question very, very specifically, I think what will happen next is that they've put themselves in a position where they have to stick with the policies they've got. And neither the members of the party nor anyone else is going to throw these people out for right or wrong, because there's only 2 years until the next election. And the failure of their policy announcement was the fact that they announced it without consulting with the people they need to consult with, whether that was the Bank of England or the OBR or the Parliamentary Party, not the members, because we just had our say in voting for them or not voting for them.
The members. I mean, in terms of the majority achieved, the members are actually mandating this, aren't they? Because she did keep saying it in the hustings. She and Sunak did keep saying this is madness, this is a fairy tale. So that's probably the one constituency in the country who have her support, or who had her support.
I didn't vote for her in the membership election. She said that the Conservative Party stands for low taxation. Yes. I think that appealed to a lot of members, and I think Sunak wasn't clear that he was going. He said he would cut taxes later, and the time was right. She went forward on a platform of cutting taxes now, and then came out with a fairly obviously very radical plan that hadn't been costed or consulted with the people who count, who've got to react to the markets, and she totally ignored those people. And I think she's created a serious problem for herself. The only way she can overcome that is that the policies work and they seem to be work in the next 2 years.
But hang on, she hasn't got.
She's in a lot of trouble.
She hasn't got 2 years, has she?
Well, I think it's unlikely that there will be another leadership election. That would be the fourth or fifth in 5 years.
Wouldn't be an election. It'd be an anointment. It'd be like the Theresa May one. I can't see it, mate. I can't see this. I mean, listen, if the polls don't move soon, I mean, imagine if they got worse. Imagine if they started posting leads bigger than 33%. You're going to sit there for another 2 years?
33% is now. I totally said that. I think you've probably seen some of the other leaders have had some catastrophically negative polls over the years, particularly after seriously bad news like this.
None of these are all record.
No choice but to carry on for another 2 years.
These are all record breaking. Now all of the polls are saying we've never recorded leads like this for any party.
It's going to be very difficult to make a record-breaking comeback from a record-breaking low. I agree.
But what does success look like then? I mean, you can say that they stick with the policies. But what can happen in that window? I disagree with you on this, and as you say, it's good to have disagreement, and neither of us are Mystic Meg, but I cannot see it lasting for 2 years. I can't see. I mean, it's such a febrile party as well, Chris. There's such a bunch of betrayers and backstabbers because none of them really believe in anything except the myth of Brexit being a good idea. So at some point, one of them's going to move.
Politicians believe in power, James. So
yeah, that's very true.
Prime goal is to achieve power, and once they're in power, they want to cling to power. Hopefully with a successful economy behind them. Clinton said years ago, it's the economy, stupid, when Bush said he'd raise taxes, and that was one of the clinchers that got him in. Plus, it was time for a change, maybe in America at that time. But
he also said, you mean these, and the word I can't say on the radio, get to decide whether or not I get re-elected. And when he said that, he was essentially talking about precisely the people that Liz Truss, I think, has irreparably spooked. There's no way that this government is ever going to be able to lay claim to fiscal credibility or market stability, is there?
They've got a long way to make up that ground because they put themselves on the back foot with the way they didn't consult. Now, whether the announcements are going to come out over the next couple of months and
I'm hearing already that the
assessments and OBR, I think they've got.
There's been reported already. I'm not interrupting you. I'm not interrupting. I'm doing breaking news like a proper grown-up journalist. But there are already reports emerging while you've been speaking that they've seen the OBRs forecasts, and the word that has been used to describe them is dire. Rory Stewart has taken to Twitter to say, well, that's why they didn't. They knew they'd be dire. That's why. And that's where I think your point becomes unsustainable, is that when all of the expert analysis says this is absolute, not just poor or suboptimal or unfortunate or imperfect, all of the expert analysis says this is crackers, then 2 years just seems impossible to me.
I think crackers seems to be slightly an overreactive statement.
Okay.
I appreciate the fact that he sacked Scholar, when he came in, because Scholar obviously maybe some plans were announced that we don't know about. Scholar said, no, you're crackers, maybe in the word he used, I don't know. Subsequently sacked. But to have created a policy in isolation of anybody would seem strange.
Yeah.
But what they didn't do was manage the announcement of it correctly. Now,
okay. No, I mean, I'm going to chalk this up as loyalty. I mean, they didn't manage the announcement correctly. Is pretty close to euphemism. But I guess if I was a Conservative Party member, I too would be clutching at whatever straws I could find, and I mean that generously and kindly. I really would be clutching at whatever straws I could find. But I'm with your permission, Chris, I'm going to stick with crackers, and that's been kind. It's 31 minutes after 11. Holly Harris is here now with your headlines. It is 11:35. I guess the other question on what is going to happen next is what should they do? Not what will they do or what will happen. That kind of takes events out of the hands of Truss and Kwarteng, doesn't it? But what should they do? There's now talk that they're going to pull money out of research and development expenditure, which is a recipe for anti-growth politics. Doesn't make any sense. They won't get big spending reductions through Parliament. Companies have already planned for the future based on corporation tax not going up, so it's going to be very hard for them to pull back on that. Stephen Bush, who is a brilliant commentator, actually, really brilliant commentator, associate editor at the Financial Times, he writes, it's very simple. All Truss needs to do is lose her Chancellor, completely undo her fiscal plan, raise taxes, and find a way to get serious pro-growth reforms past the parliamentary party. That's why I sort of affectionately described Chris, our last caller, as clutching at straws. The idea that they're just going to stick with this and get 2 years to see whether or not it works is, to my mind, pie in the sky. But hey, I'm sure I'll be wrong about this stuff one day. But that is the challenge in front of them. And that is only partly tongue-in-cheek from Stephen Bush. All Truss needs to do is lose her Chancellor, completely undo her fiscal plan. So she chucks Kwarteng under a bus and completely abandons pretty much everything that was announced in the mini-budget, raises taxes because there's a public spending crisis on the horizon, and then finds a way to get serious pro-growth reforms, and off the top of my head, I wouldn't even know what they were, past the parliamentary party. What are the real obstacles to growth at the moment? Answer, most obviously, withdrawing from the biggest single trading area on the planet and imposing trading restrictions, imposing barriers, trading barriers on our own exporters and producers. I mean, the bonkersness of it is off the scale. So I'll add that to the mix. And we haven't got long, actually, so if you've got an answer to either of those questions, get your skates on. What is going to happen next, and what should Liz Truss do? 0345 6060 973. You can answer one or other or both, but you're not allowed to ring in and answer neither. What is going to happen next? I'm with the first caller. I think the Tory party are going to have to exercise their very well-developed muscles when it comes to getting rid of incompetent leaders. Remember what happened to Ian Duncan Smith? He didn't even get to fight an election. I don't think Truss will either. 0345 6060 973. But if she is to stand a ghost of a chance of surviving, what should she do? John's in Great Ayton in North Yorkshire. John, what would you like to say?
Hi there.
Hello,
thanks
John.
for this first time caller.
Welcome.
Well, I thought I had a theory, but then you mentioned the OBR from Rory Stewart,
Yes.
and I think that's all changed. I think what will happen in the short term, I think that she will try and limp on, as it were. But I think what will happen is the shift of power is going to move from the cabinet to the backbench MPs, and I think more and more backbench MPs are going to coalesce around a single individual and start to influence policy. So she's going to have to backtrack. She's going to have to do lots more U-turns. As the Financial Times reporter says, she's going to have to drop loads and loads of her policy decisions.
That means getting rid of Kwarteng as well, doesn't it? I mean, can you do that? Can you abandon the policy without abandoning the policy maker in chief?